Welcome to the next episode of the Breakthrough Autism podcast. I am so excited to have with me here today Carolyn Mancuso, Executive Director of Ignite Behavioral Consulting, who runs a center out in Thunder Bay. Welcome, Carolyn. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me.
I'm thrilled to chat about autism, ABA, and particularly services in more rural areas like Northern Ontario. But before we start talking about that, there's a journey to how you got there. So you started, off in Toronto, moved down south, did your schooling in the States across 2 different states, Alabama, Florida, came back to Toronto, and then up to Thunder Bay. Why Thunder Bay? How'd you get there?
Oh, that's a great question. It was a really interesting journey because, I went to school in the States. I moved down to Alabama on a cross-country running scholarship. And then I was doing my psych degree and I'd never heard of ABA, didn't know anything about it. And then I was home on summer vacation and decided kind of last minute, I should probably get a job. And I ended up as a counselor at a day camp and they assigned me to be a one-to-one support for a child with autism. And I really, really quickly fell in love with it. And I went home and Googled careers with children with autism and found ABA. And so ended up in Florida for my master's and then moved back home. And, it was funny because it was kind of tricky to get into the field after studying in the States. So lots of places, they didn't want to hire me as a supervisor because I didn't have any supervisor experience. But also didn't really want to hire me as a therapist because I had a master's degree.
Right.
So it was kind of a funny adventure getting into the field. And so I covered a couple maternity leaves and then got offered a job with Child and Community Resources up in Thunder Bay as the clinical supervisor of the IBI program there.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So you were just looking, you came back from school.
Yeah.
And your story is something that I hear often from people who have gotten their master's. They're sort of in between. For those that are watching, that may be in that situation, good to get as much practical experience as you can, just like you did, right? You go where you can and where help is needed. Getting that frontline practical experience, I always believe, is key to success even as a supervisor, because how are you going to teach other people what you're doing? And so here you are looking, and not really by design or by planning, you end up getting a job in the north. And so I think it's important. The reason why I'm so excited to have you here, one of the many reasons, is to chat about services in more rural areas, because we hear often that this is a challenge. Now, I also hear on the other side, because I also give services to children with autism and ABA in a more city, urban location. We have our own challenges that we need to work through when it comes to capacity and service delivery. But certainly we do hear about the need for service in rural areas and how important that is. Every child deserves a chance. That's what I believe. And that they all deserve, ABA for those that need it. So you're up there, you have a unique perspective. I'd love to share what it's like to service kids within rural communities. And how do we help? How do we help solve the problem of getting service to the kids who are in need that deserve it? What are your thoughts? I know that's a big question.
That's a very big question.
And we're not going to solve it today. But what are some of the steps to getting there? Because you yourself ended up there, not by design, but certainly now you've stayed and you've opened up a center. It's wonderful. So, what are some of the steps that we can take to help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first one, which is probably a pretty obvious kind of standard answer, is capacity. We need both trained therapists and then, trained BCBAs to oversee those therapists so that we have enough people to actually provide services. Right now, providers, even within the urban area of Thunder Bay, they're struggling to meet the needs of children who are actually in the city center, never mind also support families who are in remote areas, who are out in, what we call the district of Thunder Bay, or who are, in, neighboring communities outside of the city. And so I think the first thing is really just continuing to build capacity, which of course needs to be done really thoughtfully and not as much as we want to do it really quickly, because we want to provide as much service as possible to kids both in the city and outside in the district. We want to make sure that we're providing good quality service.
Yes.
And so that has to be done very very carefully and very thoughtfully. So I think that's the first step. And then the second is really, being creative about how we provide services. So, using a combination of both in-person services as well as maybe telehealth or, possibly some asynchronous supervision if need be. Looking at, can we hire people from the communities that are actually living there to provide the service and then, oversee them and use that combination of in-person supervision and video supervision or telehealth or asynchronous, and really just being creative about how we provide services to those families.
Absolutely. So for those that are watching that aren't as familiar with ABA, one of the key components that you talked about repeatedly, and I talk about this a lot too, is supervision, right? That yes, the boots on the ground, so to speak, the instructors who are delivering the frontline service are incredibly important. But if nobody is guiding that ship, then the ship may be going in the wrong direction, and that won't lead to best outcomes for every child. So really thinking about capacity from a supervision lens, I think is important. And that's where the creativity can really happen is, that can be delivered in a number of ways. So that's food for thought for people when they're looking for their child or when, bigger policy decisions are made or, directions or systems, where do we take it is, okay, maybe frontline, it may have to be more localized, but supervisors can come from all sorts of different places because the reality is, right, like the spacing out in rural areas is a challenge, right? So how do you get a supervisor to go from house to house or, that type of thing can be a challenge. So how do we get there? How do we build the capacity of these supervisors? What are some of the key things? You mentioned quality. What does that look like? What does that mean? I mean, this is something that parents struggle with because they don't know what they're, looking for, and nor should they. I don't blame them, right? They're looking for guidance in this area. So how do we build that quality? What are your experiences? What's gone right for you, or what have you seen worked?
The biggest piece, and it's a piece that maybe none of us want to do, is just slowing down and really just putting lots of thought into, how we're providing supervision, making sure that, we're going beyond just like, here's what the textbook says, and really, talking to the future supervisors about, what does this look like in real life? Because we're working with people and real life is not a textbook. So really helping them kind of take that, the science and the clinical information, and how do you actually apply it in a way that's going to be meaningful and really meet families where they're at. So in terms of, what should families be looking for, I think there's some standard things like, a quality provider is obviously collecting data on the goals that you're working on. A quality provider is also going to, make sure that they're taking the goals that you want for your child and incorporating them. They're going to collaborate with you and with other professionals. And I think they're also going to meet individual families where they're at. I think that's a really big piece that's so important. I think we're really great as a field at meeting our clients where they're at, but we also have to look at, not just meeting the child where they're at, but also the family as a whole. And I think the thing that needs to happen in order to do that is a good provider is really going to take the time to get to know you and your family, not just your child.
Absolutely. I'm a big proponent of that. There are two things I think that you said that really speak to what parents can, really zone in on is there's the technical side of things, right?
Yeah.
You need to be good at ABA, knowledgeable, have that extensive expertise, strategies, take data, all those things. That's super important. And sometimes what people can look for is, that board certified behavior analyst, hopefully. So that's like a minimum bar. And I say sometimes because in certain jurisdictions, soon to also be in Ontario, we'll have regulated behavior analysts. So some form of standard guideline benchmarks that those supervisors need to hit, whether that's certification, regulation, some of the US states, that's licensure as well. All super important. You have that side of things, but then you also have this other side that you spoke to that I am also very passionate about, which is meeting families where they're at, working with the families. It's that professional partnership. Sometimes they call it the parent professional partnership that is key here to it working, right? If families aren't engaged, if families aren't involved, if they don't input in their expertise about their child, then, that's going to be a treatment plan that's not really meaningful to that child and to the future for that child and the community. So really important. Families need to feel both, right? Like, do your homework in terms of, do they have those minimum standards in place? Do they know what they're doing technically? But also, can I work with them, right? It's important. And it's a little tricky in the North because, you know, you maybe not have as many choices either. But here you are. So you went up there for a job and you stayed there. You started up a center.
I did.
Yourself. Much like me, in a different area in Thunder Bay, you've got Ignite, which is wonderful. So what led to you saying, I'm going to stay in Thunder Bay, I'm going to start this center here, and I'm really going to contribute to the community and do all the wonderful things that you talked about, because I know you do. You've got the quality in place at your center, and you're very careful about building your team to continue to, you know, have best outcomes for kids. So why Thunder Bay? Why stay?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's also kind of a funny story. You know, I never had dreams of opening my own practice. That was not in the plan. You know, I got hired. I moved to Thunder Bay. I bought a house. I was like, all right, I'm great. I'm set. I'm going to work at CCR until I retire, you know, someday. And then, you know, ministry changes came and the whole model of the program shifted and, you know, moved towards privatization and CCR actually, you know, closed their office in Thunder Bay, transitioned their staff to another provider, and that was kind of the point where I had a decision to make whether I was gonna, you know, move over or start a private practice, and that's just kind of how it happened.
Yeah. And you decided to start it in Thunder Bay.
Yeah.
Why there? You could have started anywhere.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I didn't even consider moving anywhere else. You know, I have a home there. I have a life there. You know, I know lots of the families there. I know that there were essentially no other providers at the time, and so, you know, what were families going to do? I also had clients that I was still providing supervision for, and no way I was about to abandon them.
Yeah.
So it just made the most sense.
Yeah, that's where your roots were.
Yeah.
So you stayed there. Yeah, I think it's important for people to hear, because we have talked a lot about, not just in Ontario, really across North America, and I would say argue even globally, there is a need for children with autism to learn key skills to make a meaningful difference in their life. We know ABA can be the answer for that, for many of them. Not all, but many. And so then the question becomes, okay, so, you know, where are those people who are going to work with my child? Again, not just frontline. It's important for people to understand. It's also the supervisors too. They're key here. Those are the people with extensive experience. So what do we do about that? How do we solve the capacity problem? I've always said, and your proof of this is that a lot of it happens at the grassroots level. We need to look at who is in the community, build capacity from the grassroots up, and mentorship is so key, right? We've got to foster mentorship. I wish I could take the 25 years experience. It's not just the 25 years that I have, it's the experience across kids and families, right? That's all here, and just go shoop and like give it to, I like love to just give it to my staff, you know, like if I could just download it onto, I would. It doesn't work like that. It's experiential.
It really is.
I was very blessed to be mentored by some of the top people in the field who taught me how dynamic ABA can be, how we can use it to teach skills across the board, really, right? And how that can be applied to each child is dynamic. You've also had the wonderful experience of mentors who've taught you to get you to where you are today in terms of offering quality services. So talk to us a little bit about mentorship and the experiences that you've had being mentored, and in turn, what you do for your staff as well to help them. Again, because I think this is a huge key for addressing capacity in a quality way. So what were some of your experiences in that regard, mentorship?
That's another great question. I think I'm also a huge proponent of mentorship. I think everybody should have a mentor. I think everybody should have multiple mentors across multiple different areas, whether it's, you're starting a private practice or, in regards to like overall clinical skills or within like a specific clinical area that maybe you need some support in or that you're just newer to. So I'm a huge proponent for mentorship. I think at the end of the day, nobody knows everything. And it's really important that BCBAs, whether they've been in the field a long time or they're new, are they get comfortable with that. It's okay to not have all the answers, and having mentors and recognizing that your mentor might also not have all the answers. They probably actually have a mentor.
That's right.
And so I think mentorship is so important to the field and to continuing to build that capacity in a thoughtful and meaningful way. In terms of things that I do for my staff, I think, looking at, who are the next generation of supervisors. I know that's something you and I have talked about lots. And really looking at, again, individualizing mentorship as well. You're working with people. Your staff are all very different. Some of them, might be processors. They might need time to kind of mull over information and then come back and talk about it. Others might be, quicker to take it and put it into action. And so really taking the time to learn about your staff, learn the things that work for them, and then the areas that maybe they need some more coaching in, making sure that you're giving that to them, that you're open to supporting them in ways that work for them.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And again, it's the experience, right?
Yes.
So being there, you've got your phone a friend, right? You can call people and say, gosh, like I've got this tricky case, or do you have any, I'm seeing it from this direction. Is there a different direction? And a lot of that is, again, experiential, right? And you're there for your staff as they are learning different pieces, different competencies, and that comes up per child, per family. And then there's the other side of things, even in terms of supervising other staff, because that's how we work, right? We have a tiered service delivery model. I always say it's like tiers of a cake, right? And so there's a trickle down effect of you're not going to be there running all the sessions when you're a supervisor. So you've got to impact the people who are, and there's skill in that too. So there's a lot of reasons to phone a friend. And as you were starting out, you had your mentors that helped you. Any moments or any lessons that stood out to you that you took with you to say, oh, this mentor taught me this and I took it throughout my career, key take homes that you benefited from in terms of the mentorship process?
Well, I got lots of wonderful mentorship from you, which was really, really helpful as I was starting Ignite. And I think something that I took from that is really just the attitude of paying it forward. And, when people come to me in the field who are either looking at starting a private practice or who are looking for mentorship, I think about you and about how you paid it forward to me. And so I now try to make sure that I'm paying it forward to them, whether they're in the field or, in a totally different field, and, have questions about starting a practice.
Yeah. I always say the reason we all do this, and that's so wonderful to hear you do it too, is like we're only as good as our newest entry supervisor, right, in the field, right? We are stronger. The stronger we all are means we all can make an impact, right, on kids. And that's really what this is about. I'm not going to be able to service every child in Ontario, let alone across Canada or North America. But if I can help others deliver really good quality services to the kids that they're working with, why not, right? This is a science, it's shared, no one owns it, right? And even its application and the experiences that we learn, we all have had the wonderful benefit of paying it forward, learning and then paying it forward. I feel it's almost like my duty, I guess, to say like, people taught me too. This isn't magical where I got to in my career. There's people who really impacted me, and I'm so grateful that they did. And so that paying it forward is how we also help more kids,
absolutely,
right, and their families. How about in school? Like you worked with some wonderful people in school before you even got to the point where you thought, okay, I can do some supervision. Any learnings from that? I get a lot of questions from newer staff who are contemplating a career in ABA. So they've started frontline and now they're thinking, I want to go to school, and what's the point? What do you get out of that?
Yeah, that's a fabulous question. Yeah, so I was really lucky. I got to work with Dr. Raymond Miltenberger at the University of South Florida, which was a really great experience. He's wonderful. And so that was such a great experience of really getting a good grasp of the technical aspects of ABA and really understanding the concepts and the theory behind it. And so that was really great. And then, while doing that, also working at a placement and actually being able to apply it and really have that understanding of, again, how do those textbook concepts translate to real life?
Yes.
And make that real impact. And I think that is something that, going back to mentoring and supervision, that's something that I think really is really important to help new supervisors understand, is that there's this magical science that is so wonderful and powerful and very technical, but we're, again, working with real people,
Yes.
both the people you're supervising as well as the clients, so the children and their families. And so we really have to look at, how do we take that science and use it with real people and in a real life way so that it's making that meaningful impact, and so that it makes sense for everyone.
Absolutely. So school, right? And in school, being able to have the opportunities to take that textbook and apply it to the real world.
Yep.
This is something I also talk to a lot of my staff about and students about. And I think was an important component of your success too when you were done, because you weren't just learning through the textbook. By virtue of different experiences, you're able to say, okay, let's see what this looks like. And we both know, because I've had the same similar experience, that, okay, it's a little different when there's a live human being, especially a little kid who's a little unpredictable and not going to just do, X, Y, and Z according to that textbook or program. That is such a key important part of the educational experience that people can have, right? It's, yes, you've got to learn all those technical things, and then you got to try it out.
Yeah.
And if you can do the two together, it's really where the magic happens, right?
Absolutely.
You read about it and you do it with other people supporting you. So this is something that we also try to do, in our clinics too, right? Is that those opportunities?
Absolutely. And I think that, again, it's such a huge piece. I think it's so important that you, as the BCBA or as the supervisors, that you have that technical understanding and you understand, all of the concepts and all of the terms in their, infinite science.
Yeah.
It's so important to actually have that understanding, but then, taking it and applying it. And then, when you're explaining it to new staff, you don't need to go into the, a very in-depth definitions or technicalities of it. They need to be able to apply it, right? And so knowing, when to talk the talk and when to focus on helping people walk the walk is really important.
Yeah. How do you take that talk and turn it into something that someone's going to experience, right?
And that families will understand.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because I always say, we're in a child's life for this much of their life, right? That family's going to be with that child for a really long time. So to be able to get that generalization, that extension to them in a way that's again, it has to be meaningful to that family is really, really key. We've talked a lot about the systems aspects, which are so important to making all of this work, again, for children and their families. Part of it too is the hook of ABA. So, we've all come into the field in a number of different ways. For you, why ABA? Why autism? Why this field? What excites you about it? What got you, motivated to have the stretch of the career that you've had, including up to the point of having your center?
At one point, I didn't even know what ABA was. I think the original hook was, that little person that I was so privileged to work with at day camp in the summer, who I just fell in love with and fell in love with, not just supporting them, but really the creative problem solving of, taking their interests and taking them as a person and figuring out how do I help this individual in a way that's going to work best for them. And I think that was just the actual creative problem solving process was so motivating for me, but also obviously the actual success and seeing them be independent and successful and happy at camp as opposed to just there. And so that was just so powerful and so meaningful. And then, I went home and I Googled careers and found ABA and, started the master's program and still didn't really know what I was getting into. But I remember my first day at placement watching someone do some naturalistic teaching with the kiddo, and I was like, oh yeah. I was like, that's it. That's what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I think, it's just such an amazing field and such an amazing role, both, seeing the children succeed, seeing the people you mentor succeed. It's just so reinforcing all around.
Absolutely. To see the impact.
Yeah.
It's incredible. And yes, it takes time to get there. We know there's grunt work to get there. Multiple learning trials for every child's different. In your case at the camp, it was a child with autism as well. Yeah. So and I had similar experience when I first started with the first client that I ever worked with, a little boy, and watching him learn. And in my case, it was the picture exchange was one of the first things that I saw him do really spontaneously and independently, from not being able to communicate any needs or wants to using PECS, picture exchange communication system, his first, couple trials on his own, and experiencing that of him just finding the binder and, finding that picture of that toy and like giving it to me. And I'm like, he's got it. That light bulb went off and I'm okay. ABA, this thing works. ABA works. This is amazing. And I was part of it. I've changed a child's life, right? And to have those experiences for you too. Any skills, any magical moments with clients, success stories, sometimes I call them, that stick out to you in terms of the impact that ABA had on a client or a family? Any memorable moments for you?
There are so many. We'd be here all day, probably for a couple weeks actually, if I listed them all. And I think that's actually the most powerful thing and the most magical thing, is that it's this huge collection of success stories. There are so many. And of course there's the big successes, right? They're sharing in those really joyous moments with families when, their child does something that maybe they didn't ever think they'd be able to do, or something that used to be a really, really difficult struggle, like a dentist appointment or a haircut, is now like not a problem. And so there's those big joyous moments with families, but then there's also just countless moments of like magical connection with kids, seeing them, like that light bulb moment you talked about, when they realize, that they have the power to communicate and, get the things that they need, when they demonstrate a skill for the first time, and like, you're obviously so excited for them, but you see that they're excited for themselves and they're so proud of themselves. So there's just countless of those moments spread across every day and every week. And I think for me, that's where the magic is. And really the power of ABA. Absolutely.
So one of the things that I talk about often is that we come to appreciate certain skills, right? You see something like that picture exchange, or I see a child pretend that this block is a phone, right? And all of a sudden they do that and I think, wow, that is amazing. Do you see what he did? Do you see? Or, a joint attention. So a parent points to something, they transfer their gaze, the child transfers their gaze, and then they look back at each other. And even more magical is if they say something about it. Oh, look at that airplane, that was so cool. Like, it was flying really fast. And the child says, yeah, it's a big airplane, or something like that, right? Yeah. Those things I see with the clients that we work with, and I go, wow, like that is really special. This is not something that is typically noticed in society, right? We notice other big milestones, certainly, right? There's a big deal, like maybe like when a child sleeps all night or something like that when they're young. Okay, that's important. Parents I've been there myself. Yay, my child's sleeping all night, or child graduates from kindergarten, or first day of school. Like, there's certain things that general society can really appreciate as successes in terms of skill development. But we look at it with an even finer lens, and we get excited about these little things like the pretending of the phone. Anything like that you can share, because I think the general public can't always appreciate how tricky these skills are to learn. That's why we get so excited, because it could have represented hundreds of learning trials for that child. And we know where it's going because it leads to other things too. Any examples that you've had in your career where it's like, okay, this kid got, that people might not really think about otherwise?
I think about a couple little guys that I've worked with who, they've got some really strong interests, and they're really focused on their interests, and, they really like to play in a certain way, and that's all fine and great. And they're really not, or they really weren't like aware of things happening around them, or even of like the people around them. They were just kind of, you know, tunnel vision on that Thomas train or that,
Right.
you know, blue balloon, or, you know, whatever it happened to be that they were really interested in. And I think some really cool kind of like micro moments that society might not see would be, you know, the moment when that child starts to notice when, you know, somebody else walks in the room and they turn around and look like, oh, hey, you're here.
Yeah.
Those are huge moments that I think other
Yeah.
people in society who don't understand might overlook.
Yeah.
And not understand, you know, the importance and the gravity of just even being aware of stuff going on around you.
Yes. Orientation to things
Yes.
is huge, right?
People.
and them doing it on their own.
Yes.
I say sometimes, like, we don't always want to just come to their world, which we need to.
Of course.
Every person has people coming into their world. But we also want the kids to come to our world. You know, we're inviting you in. Come on in. There's great stuff here too, because there's opportunity for so much more to happen that way. Also really important, because I'm into these days debunking some myths about ABA, is that it's not to say that the Thomas train or the balloon or whatever they're super duper into needs to go away.
No.
They absolutely have the right to have their interests and have their fun, and that is important too. And people can come into their world, or they can share those things with their world too. So we're not taking away anything that matters to them. We're expanding on it, right? It's new opportunities for them to be able to, maybe they orient, maybe they say, hey, check it out. One of my things that I really like is shared enjoyment, you know, show people the things that you like, right? Hey, I got this cool train here. Awesome, right? So those are all such huge orienting, just notice stuff on your own.
Yeah.
It's like, yes, okay, I see where this is going, right? It's huge. Flip side to all of this, of course, successes are super important, but we know there's sometimes challenges to getting there. It doesn't happen overnight. Some, you know, they're magical moments, but it's just like, you know, there's no such thing as an overnight success, like in celebrity land, right? We know that it takes a lot of work to get to where you're recording you know, an album, or being, you know, the main actor in some movie or something like that, right? Just like our work too, there's things that we need to push through. Learning in general, this isn't just exclusive to ABA and autism, it happens in learning, that we work through it, and then on the other side there's incredible things. Any challenges that you've had to help clients work through, families in your career, how'd you get to the other side of those things too?
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's always going to be challenges, like you said. There's always going to be hard things to work through in learning, whether, you know, it's our clients or even ourselves. It's just part of life. And so I think for me, it's been really, you know, creative problem solving just overall when a kiddo is having trouble learning a specific skill. And I think, you know, how to overcome that is really, again, just going to keep going back to this, looking at them, you know, as an individual, really looking at what things work for them, what things don't, and really thinking outside of the box. Okay, this is how we've always done things, or this is typically what works, but it's not working. So what else can we do? And really just being flexible with how we're teaching and really creating something that works for them. And just taking it one day at a time, breaking it down into a smaller chunk if we need to. And I think, you know, when it's around supporting families, just, you know, helping families be okay with sometimes this is just where we're at. It's not where we're going to be, but right now this is where we're at, and that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's part of the experience. It's necessary.
Yes.
It's just like toilet training. I say sometimes, like, you got to have, the accidents are going to be part of it, right? We can't get around it. You want to get them out of a diaper, they're going to have some accidents. We're going to get through it. That's where we're at right now. But there is something on the other side. Here's the steps to getting there. Another thing that you said, again, thinking about debunking some myths about ABA, is that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not, this is how we're going to teach, and we're only going to teach in this way. The notion really is, and this is one of the many reasons I love ABA, because it's so optimistic, we just look at the environment and we say, okay, what's contributing to learning? What's a barrier to learning? How do we move things around, rearrange things so that learning can happen? And that's a really good example of how you can work through challenges, even at a learning level or beyond, is really to look at, okay, this is tricky, right? He's stuck on this for whatever reason. This strategy isn't quite cutting it, or this step. Maybe we jumped a little too high, or maybe we went a little off course. It's hard to know because learning is dynamic. It's not just linear. So, but as behavior analysts, one of the magical things that we do, I think, is to really say, okay, we can rework this, right? Like, it's not just one way or the highway, right? There's many ways, many different paths to getting there. And that's really key to working through things, and to impart on the people that we work with too, to see things like that. That's a different way of looking at the world, right? It's not just, well, he doesn't have the prerequisites, or he's not ready to learn yet. No, he's ready. We just haven't found the right way for him to learn, right? It's really, it's a great thing. It gets me excited. That's the problem solving thing that you talked about too, right? This is where we kind of, geek out or nerd out in some ways. It's like, okay, how do I figure it? But it's exciting. It's a puzzle. You're trying to figure things out, right? It's some kind of, it's almost like a detective trying to figure out what pieces are going to work to ultimately put everything together, right?
Yeah.
So that's from the kids' side. Staffing wise, what are some of your successes? You mentioned having that impact, right? I too feel that way. I started in the field getting excited about the impact that I could have directly on clients, and then it's evolved. I didn't expect this, but it's evolved into, I can have this massive impact if I help others with the work that they're doing, right? And that's a skill onto its own. So any memorable moments for you in terms of, helping the next generation of ABA workers, professionals in all sorts of different areas, whether it's frontline or supervisors? What are some of the successes that stick out to you in that regard?
Yeah, I think, talking about, thinking outside of the box and being creative, I think, one of the biggest successes is helping staff who are newer, take those concepts and again, apply them in a way that is meaningful, that is individualized for each kiddo, and really bring their creativity and bring that joy into the sessions, and really look at, okay, this kiddo really likes, whatever it is, whether it's Thomas or the blue balloon or something different, and looking at, how can we expand on that? How can we have fun in a different way? Like, how can we make this session even better? And how can we make learning even better and even more fun? And so really helping staff, move beyond that, okay, this is how, this child likes to play with this. That's great. Absolutely. Let's play that way. But let's demonstrate some other ways. Let's see if we can create a new fun game that we can both play with that thing that they really like.
Yes.
And so helping staff kind of move beyond that, that box of well, this is how we do things, or this is how you play with that, and really just getting creative. And so I think one of my favorite things is overhearing my staff do really cool creative things with their kiddos' interests and being like, that is just awesome. And then hearing not only them get really into it, but the kids really enjoying it as well. And then, everybody's day is just so much better.
Absolutely. Sometimes I hear them and think, my staff that I work with on our team, I think they just thought of things that were 1,000 times better than I could have ever thought of. That's a really good one. I wouldn't have thought of that, which is fantastic, because that's going to help that child learn, right? But it's changing how you think about learning and what can be done, right? It's that optimistic viewpoint that it really can be. You just got to figure that out, right? So you've had a lot of experience getting people jazzed about, a career in ABA, especially in the North. You got to do some work there to get people working in the field. And a lot of people don't even know what it is, to be frank. I didn't when I started. I had no idea. I found one of my friends that I was living with at McMaster back in the day came home with a flyer. I didn't even know what it was. I just thought, okay, kids with autism, teaching them stuff. I don't know what they said ABA on it. I didn't know what it was. I just, okay, sure, I'm gonna try. So, we all had different paths to getting there. So for anybody who's maybe contemplating a career in this world, right? Or even, like you said, you Googled therapy for or how kids with autism, whatever you Googled at the time, right? How do we help kids with autism? What would you say to people that may be contemplating a career? Why come and join us?
I'm very biased, but because it's the best.
Yeah.
I think it's a career that, while yes, there are challenges, not every day is perfect and sunshine and rainbows, overarchingly, it is just full of, like you talked about, it's so optimistic, it's so full of joy, and really, if you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And if your frontline staff aren't having fun and the kids aren't having fun, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
I think it's a really great combination of so many things, of optimism, of fun, of problem solving, of creativity, and there's just so much positivity around it. What could be better?
I don't know. I think about how lucky we are. We're so blessed that we get to wake up every day and do all that.
Absolutely.
And that translates into a meaningful impact into another individual's life. Like, how many people get to say that they did that in their lives? Yeah. And most likely not just one. There's going to be a bunch of kids and families and communities that you have a direct positive impact on, and you can have fun and be creative and do all this wonderful stuff while you're on that journey to getting there, right? And even those challenges, so I'm the same in terms of chatting with people, but okay, it's not all sunshine and rainbows here. You got to work through some stuff. There's a reason why kids are coming to therapy or treatment. It's because they have needs and they need to learn certain skills. So some of that we're going to have to work through. It almost makes the joy and the outcome even better. Because I remember those things where it's like, I remember when I had to we ran those, that teaching program, however many times across, however many days, we switched it up and we made it dynamic. We had to think about different ways to make it interesting and motivating and da-da-da-da-da. And we did that for however many months or whatever. I remember when we first ran that, he wouldn't look up and notice anybody, but now he is. That just, to me, almost makes it better.
Absolutely.
Right? Because if there's no work involved, then, we wouldn't be where we are. That's okay too. If it could be that easy, I wish it would, but it just isn't, right? So we've got to work through it. It kind of makes it a little sweeter. You can remember,
And no day is the same. Every day is different. There's always something new. And I think there's ongoing learning, even as a supervisor, even as someone who's been in the field almost 10 years or a little over 10 years. Math is hard. Yeah.
I can too.
There's always learning, right? And every kiddo might teach you something different, Again, nobody knows everything, and, we're always learning, so.
That's true. The days go by fast.
They do.
That's for sure. Sometimes how is it 4:00? I thought it was 9:00, 9 a.m. 5 minutes ago. Yeah. Just because there's so much happening, right? So never a dull moment. That's for sure.
Yes.
And that's pretty cool about a job too, right? That you're really immersed in it. So that's from the staff side. So I know, you and I have a similar experience in terms of we talk to a number of families who've gotten a diagnosis relatively recently. They call us, their child's been diagnosed, and they're looking for, what do I do next? So what do you tell those families? Families of children with autism who've gotten a recent diagnosis and are looking to the world for what's next? What do I do? What do you share?
Oh, that's a great question. There's so much information out there. The internet has been so wonderful in many ways, but also, can make things difficult for families to navigate when they're getting tons and tons of conflicting information about what they should or they shouldn't do. And I think the advice that I would give to families is, figure out what's important to them, and then, look for services that align with that. And really, don't be afraid to advocate for your kids and for your needs, and to ask for what you need from service providers you're working with. And that's really, really simple advice, but I think it's not always as easy to do. But really just asking for what you need and making sure that the service providers you're working with align with your values and they fit, again, they're willing to meet you where you're at.
Absolutely. So those are some of the preliminary things for sure families need to think about, because especially when you're looking for a professional, right? You kind of just maybe are happy if you find anybody to begin with. It's like, okay, let's just go. But there is an important process in terms of asking those questions and making sure it's the right fit. So now they've said, okay, ABA, what is that? How do you explain that to them? What's next? What are they going to do if they say, okay, we want to go with Ignite or anywhere that offers, wonderful treatment? How do you explain that? How do you walk them through that process?
Another very fantastic question. I typically give them kind of what I call the Coles notes of ABA. So I explain that, it's the science of learning and behavior. We take skills, we break them down into really small pieces, and we meet your child where they're at, and then that's where we start, and then we just raise the bar like itty bitty bits at a time until, they're demonstrating the skill where we feel like they should be or where they need to be so that they are independent and happy.
Very good. Awesome. Yeah. And that's really what I think most parents that we talk to, that's what they're looking for, right? It's that future for their child of happiness and independence. And how nice would it be? And it is often that now even the family can have some of that too, because that is also intertwined with some of their child's needs, where, their needs get pushed aside. We see this often where families aren't able to work or do other things in their life because their child's needs are often profound, right? A lot of the kids we work with, at least, I know it's a spectrum, but it's hard to have a job and it's hard to do other things when, there's a lot that you're trying to do for your child. A nice little byproduct of ABA is, while your child's earning all this great stuff, it also allows for that independence for the family, and I see families going back to work.
Yes.
One parent or the other being able to, or just go to the gym or whatever they can do during the day, that they're not worried about getting a call that says like, come pick up your kid or something, because they know that the people working with their child are working through that stuff if needed, right? What are some of the things that you've seen in terms of impact of ABA on the family beyond the child? We've talked about the importance of families working with us, collaborating with us, and it's super important that we make those child outcomes. But beyond that, how does that impact the family? What are some of your experiences in that way?
So I've had similar experiences that you've had in that, seeing families, be able to go back to work or get to the gym or just have some, time by themselves to breathe or to watch a show or to, do whatever they want to do. But I think the other big thing is seeing families empowered. So, we do lots of work around empowering the kids that we work with to be independent, but empowering the families to be able to help their child. And so, supporting them in learning strategies and the strategies that we learn about their kids that work really well, and then coaching them on how to use them and supporting them so that they feel, confident going to the grocery store,
for sure,
taking their kid for a haircut or to the dentist or to the doctor, and, being able to, go out in the community to be able to go out in the community more confidently.
Yes.
And, not worried about, what if my little guy gets dysregulated? What am I going to do? How am I going to handle that? And so just being confident in that they can manage it.
Absolutely.
If it does happen.
Yeah, because the alternative is they might not just go out in the community. We've seen that a lot, right? It can become very isolating for not just the child, but the entire family, because that's tough to do. And that is a wonderful thing that ABA providers can do for families, is really empower them in terms of sharing those strategies and giving them that confidence. When I was doing some research for my PhD in this area of family collaboration, one of the interesting things that came up, it's good for families to know this, but also for professionals to know, that it's not just the ability for a family to implement those strategies that can help their child with the support of the therapy team, because I'm always big on we do the heavy lifting. We're not asking parents to be therapists or anything like that. We got to do that. That's really important. But families can extend the learning into the natural environment, extend the strategies. That in itself is an important feat, but also it's the belief. It's what we call sometimes self-efficacy. That's the fancy name. It's the belief that you can do that as a parent, that you can actually act as a change agent for your child, that you can make a difference in your child's life. Interestingly, what we sometimes see early, right, in terms of the diagnosis or whatnot, is that just because of the experiences and the challenges that present at times with the autism diagnosis, is that families think, well, I can't do anything, right? I can't be a change maker in my child's life. And so by us working with the children and helping them learn skills, but also by extension, teaching the families how to do that, it not only changes the direct impact of what they're learning then, it's also the mentality, the belief that I can do it.
Yes.
So this is so important for a parent, right? And we do that. It's a wonderful thing that we that we do. What does it mean? It means you can go out in the community. You can go to a restaurant. You can go to whatever, we say Canada's Wonderland around here, our amusement park or whatever you want to do, go do it,
You can leave your kid with a babysitter.
Right. You can actually have 5 minutes to yourself, and that's a pretty amazing thing too. Absolutely. These are all things that we don't think about. Like, we don't set out to do that often in ABA because we're looking at it from the child's lens, but it's also impacting the family. So another thing that comes up, when families are, services and where am I going and what am I doing early on is, how am I going to make this work? I think there's also an added logistical piece, especially in more rural areas, like in the north of Ontario, but even throughout the globe, this is a common experience if people aren't, in an urban area. But even in urban areas, families have to think about, how am I going to make this work? How do you work through that with families? Because there is some commitment to treatment, right?
Yep.
Just like any other type of healthcare, if their child needed or if we needed it. How do you help families walk through those considerations? Why take your kid out of school some of the time? Or they're probably going to be driving to your center. I don't know from how far. These are tricky things for families to consider. So what kind of things do you think about, work with families, work with staff on to help meet everybody halfway?
Yeah, I think, again, I'm just probably going to say it a million times during this, is just really meeting families where they're at. And so really having those open conversations about, what works for this family, where is this family at, what are the logistics that they're navigating, and then really doing everything we can in our power to work with them and to collaborate and to make some of those tricky things as easy as possible for them. And really just taking each individual family as an individual family.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Working through, having those conversations, especially early on at intake, but even throughout, because kids, as they get older or things change, they change schools or they change, arrangements for childcare or whatever. You got to work through all that stuff. One of the questions we sometimes get is why should I do this? I got school. He's got, can I take him to your center at 6:00 at night? Right? So how do you help families navigate that? Because it is an investment. I think it's an investment.
Absolutely.
It's not just a financial investment, whether or not a child's getting funding for services. It's a resource investment. So why do that, Carolyn? Why should I have to drive my kid to your center and figure out a bunch of different stuff in my life? How do you help families through that?
Yeah, I think, in terms of school, really helping them understand the difference between school and therapy. And school is an absolutely wonderful and important experience for our kiddos, but it's a very different experience from what we do. There's only so much that, an EA or an SSP can do in a school setting to help their child versus, that one-to-one experience that they're getting with somebody who, has the training and has someone supervising them, where all the programming is really specifically individualized for their child. Their goals are being taken into consideration. And like we talked about earlier, they're with a staff that has the ability to work through the challenges and really support them through that. Whereas school's a very different environment, and that's just not always possible.
Yes.
Even with the most wonderful, support staff in schools or the most wonderful teacher, sometimes it's not possible because of the environment. And so really helping families understand that that ABA and therapy it is very different, and your child's going to get different things out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it's not one or the other. One doesn't need to be mutually exclusive of the
Absolutely.
other. As you mentioned, school can play an important role in a child's life, and it should. And I always say our job is to put ourselves out of a job. Ultimately, some of my happiest days in my career when we have graduation and kids don't need us anymore or need us very minimally, right? It's dynamic. The amount of time they come to us versus school throughout their childhood or their skill development should be dynamic. It's not an all or nothing thing. That's another myth, right? People, 40 hours or nothing, now maybe 20 hours or nothing. That's not the case. It should be child specific. So school can certainly play some important roles in a child's life, but like you said, and I agree, that there are just some things that school's just not set up for. It's not to the fault the schools or the wonderful staff that are there. It's a different type of educational environment. It's not treatment. It's just not, right? And there's a level of specialization, just like any other type of treatment that people may need for various reasons in their life. And that's where ABA comes in. Ultimately, it helps them do even better at school. Like, that's the point of it, is to help them do even better, right? So, that's what we're there for. And we don't have to work in a vacuum. We can understand some of the challenges in school and make that better. So, yes, there are logistical things to work out, but we can work through them, and it's worth it, because it's the return on the investment. It's the outcomes, right? How do we get to that side where we know your child can live their best life, right? So we've talked a lot about, the littlers maybe in terms of the earlier stages of therapy, but certainly we can treat kids at lots of different ages. What are some of the things that people should know about, ABA in terms of, this isn't just for preschoolers, right? And yes, it's important. We love to get them when they're young, but we can also help kids even when they're 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, into teenage years. What are some of the things that you think are important for families to understand, for communities to understand about ABA when it comes to maybe some older kids?
So it's really just about meeting them where they're at and looking at what is going to impact their lives in the most positive way, and what's going to give them the best outcome, help them be as independent and happy as they can be, whether they're 8 or 3, doesn't really matter.
That's right. 15, 18. And there's some people that work with adults. I don't work with adults personally, but we can also make an impact in their lives through ABA, as you mentioned, because it's so individualized. So, we talked a lot about families having input and collaborating into therapy, which is so important. But we also have families who look to us as well for guidance in those areas, right? So I would say that's what makes the great team. We're experts in ABA, you're experts in your child. You put those two things together, that's what helps a child reach their best outcomes. So when you're looking at some of those, let's say, quote unquote, older kids, so past preschool years, what are some of the things that you look for that you may offer families guidance on? Because we see things sometimes that they don't see in terms of goal setting, or how do you steer that ship in a certain direction. If I'm a family watching right now and I have a child who's 8 or 9 years old, what are some things that I should consider that I haven't thought about? And of course, every child's different, we understand, but just bigger picture stuff that, you might want to look at this and see how they're doing in this. Because if they're doing great, we move on to something else, but maybe there's some gaps in certain areas. What might be that perspective for those older kids versus some of the younger kids?
I think one question I always like to ask families, regardless of age, is just, are there any parts of your day that are hard, or any parts of your child's day that are really difficult, or, they're a struggle, or maybe you both dread them, your older kiddo, maybe still hates toothbrushing, or really struggles with, when the seasons change and having to switch wardrobes, or that really fun in-between time. Everything from those things to, academic things to social things to, some of those skills that we maybe don't talk about as much, like time management or organization. Do they have friends? How are they, doing at recess? Or, if they're older, what are they doing on lunch break? Things like that.
Things that just think about their day-to-day life, right? Let's take me through a day in the life of Johnny, let's just say, right? And how things are going with Johnny and Sally. It's always Johnny and Sally. But, what's going well, and where are the challenges, right? Walking through that, anything from self-care to academic to social to some of those planning skills, initiating, we call that executive functioning. So we have a fancy name for that. So walking through that.
Yeah, and then I think whenever possible, asking Johnny or Sally, what do you want to learn? Is there anything that, you're not happy with or could be better in your life that we can help you with? And so really getting the client's input on those things.
Yes, I love that, because they come up with really great things too that I've never thought of, things that they enjoy, cooking in the kitchen. I've gotten that, or I want to be a chef one day, or another one, this is some of the teenagers that we work with. I want to be a mailman. Awesome. Okay. Well, then let's get going. We got to learn some of those skills too. Or, I want to date, these some of our older clients,
those
right?
are always really fun.
I mean, it really depends on each child, right? And what matters to them. So if they can, getting their input too is wonderful. Absolutely. And through that process, what I found too is, what's interesting is sometimes when I talk to families, or they'll mention something just like off the cuff. my child's, really having a hard time with going out to family restaurants. We had this like communion this weekend, for one of our family members, or bar mitzvah, or whatever, whatever matters to your community. But we're not going because, or that wedding, because, he has a really hard time with whenever we get into this type of environment.
Yes.
I go, really? Oh, we didn't know that, do you want to work on that? Because we're not going to solve it for this weekend, but I bet you there's going to be another one again in the future. And I have families that go, you can work on that? Or you can work on like getting him to pack his bag, his backpack, or not forget his stuff, or whatever. Yeah, we can. It's just learning.
Yeah.
So having those conversations, you might get some things that come up that you wouldn't think normally to ask to teach.
And I think also thinking about like what's coming next, right? So maybe they're 11, 12 now, and that's great, but the teenage years are coming, and do they know how to shave?
Yes.
What are we going to do when they have a mustache?
Yeah.
And maybe they want to have a mustache, in which case that's great, but maybe they don't. And so looking ahead at, what is coming next in the next stage of life, and how can we help set them up to be as successful and independent, as happy as they can be?
Absolutely. I always say, for those of us, including you, who've been in the field for, many years now, sometimes you lose track of how many years, but we have been. And just thinking about the future, we have a window into the future, right? We've got to think about that too. Because as we've mentioned, it can take multiple learning trials. It can take a little while to get there. So if we have some runway before that plane needs to take off, right? We want to be able to work on those things very actively. And so thinking about, hitting those teenage years is huge. Puberty is huge, right? As another area. And you can get started on that. Even when they're younger, getting them ready for those things. That is a really important area. Thinking about independence, thinking about protecting our clients from anything that they may be vulnerable to.
Absolutely.
Get the adults out of the way.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I mean, also thinking about, there are things that may be okay and appropriate at one stage of life, but not necessarily at another. So it might be totally fine for, Johnny, who's 5, to really want to sit on the teacher's lap and, things like that. But when he's 16, 17, that's maybe not going to be okay. And so always thinking ahead about how do we set them up to be successful?
Absolutely. Because, one of the good things, but not always good things, is like you learn certain rituals or routines, and you have certain habits that can really act in your favor, right? But then all of a sudden when those shift, for some of our clients, that can be really tricky. Like, what do you mean I'm not supposed to hug my teacher? Yeah, you can't hug your teacher when you're, 13. So let's get on that sooner than later. Never mind, probably even when you're 6 or 7 or 8. So, but those can be tricky things for a lot of the kids that we work with to understand. So getting parents ready for that, right? Thinking about, okay, what again lies ahead, and maybe we should start working on some of those things. One of the ones that I like to work on is private versus public. That's a really important one. We can start that real early, right? Even with toileting, I say toileting's not over until we're out of the bathroom, because we shouldn't have to be in the bathroom, when this is all said and done, from start to finish, right? So let's start thinking about that right now, because we don't want to teach kids and ultimately teenagers that an adult should have to be around all the time, right? Anything that sticks out for you when it comes to, because we've talked a lot about independence and happiness is, I think the two are actually intertwined, right? To be able to say, I have the power to do this. I can do this on my own, right? I don't need people with me. There's a sense of pride and dignity to that. Any standouts for you when it comes to independence and working through and thinking about, because we're there in therapy with them, right? But eventually we got to get away. So we got to think about that. And for families too, they're there helping their kids every day, right? And of course they're well-intentioned.
Yes.
But again, okay, they're getting a little older. We can, they can do that. Yeah. Things that you try to encourage when it comes to independence.
Oh gosh, everything. They should be able to do, we want them to be able to do everything independently, whether it's, activities of daily living like toileting or showering or brushing their hair, or, if we're helping them, learn some prerequisite skills to be independent on like a job site, they need to be able to do those things as much as possible on their own. But even, those skills that we work on with, preschool age kids, like being able to ask for things that you want, they need to be able to do it independently, whether that thing that they want is right in front of them or not right in front of them.
Yes.
It's about making sure that they're able to do everything independently as possible, right?
And I guess sometimes we don't think about those things, even just as a parent myself. I don't have kids with special needs, but when they were younger, they're teenagers now, but it's like you're on autopilot. You're just doing stuff, right? And so you're not thinking about like maybe I should like take a little step back, because you're not going to be able to get out of the room like immediately, especially not with kids with autism. So thinking about really being conscientious about, do I really need to be this close, like doing this for them, or like tying their shoes, or, getting that button, done up on their pants. And if I do, can I do it a little bit less? Like just getting parents aware of that, and even staff sometimes, right?
Yep. And I think something else, I know we've talked a lot about like independence and happiness. I think something else that's really important, and sometimes, a difficult conversation with families, is talking about the fact that sometimes your child being happy and your child being safe are not synonymous. They're not always the same thing. And that we need to look at making sure that they're able to be safe and happy, not just happy.
That is a good one, because there may be a little bit of a learning curve there, right? In terms of, okay, that over there, that looks really interesting. I'm just going to run on the street to get to it. Well, that in the moment, they may be thinking that would make them happy, but that's certainly not safe.
Yeah.
And so those boundaries, right? Like instituting some of those boundaries around safety for future happiness, right, is really important.
Yeah, and I think, of course, we want our learners to be able to access, any type of like sensory things that they need. And I think that's, again, where some of those boundaries come into, looking at, okay, yes, we want to meet their sensory needs, but we also want to make sure that they're able to do it in a way that is safe.
That's right. Absolutely. Absolutely. A lot of thought needs to happen around that. Yeah. Again, just like we do with other kids, it's just like there's a bit more of a runway and more steps that need to be taken in order to get there, right? Because we want kids to be able to live their best lives, and independence and happiness are really key to that. And I think that's something that has really come through in our conversation today. So in terms of the world, right? And for people to understand in the greater community, what do you want them to know about ABA, autism, the work that we do? What is this thing that we do? What do you want the world to know about ABA?
That, that it is this really incredible application of the science of learning and behavior. And, just like anything that's powerful, it needs to be done really thoughtfully, and it needs to be done really collaboratively. And, if you're working with a provider that is a good fit for your family, that it can really have a really incredible impact for your child and for your family.
Amazing. That there's hope, that there's optimism, right? That your child can learn, that there's a way for them to get to where they need to go, and that can be done through ABA. Absolutely. Very optimistic, leading to happiness and independence. That's the key take home today.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for being here, Carolyn, and sharing your journey with us. And thank you for supporting communities in rural areas in the north of Ontario. And I hope this serves as inspiration to others that it can be done, that every child deserves access to treatment. Every child deserves a chance to live their best life. Thank you for the work that you do in that regard.
Thanks so much for having me.